I quietly made my way into the house through the back, taking great care to avoid making any noise. I knew that using the front door was out of the question because the alarm system, which my wife Shelley had insisted we install, would be triggered immediately. Shelley had been quite adamant about the necessity of having this alarm system in place, though her reasoning had always seemed a bit peculiar to me. Nevertheless, I eventually agreed to her request and had the system installed. The garage door was also off limits, as opening it would activate the alarm as well. Shelley had specific instructions about the delay setting on the push-button panel. She had asked me to set it to just 10 seconds. She believed that the standard 45-second delay was absurd, arguing that a burglar could easily reach our bedroom before the alarm even went off. Despite my initial reluctance, I conceded to her demands, acknowledging her concerns about security. Thus, to avoid any unnecessary alarms, I opted to enter the house through the basement door, navigating quietly and carefully to ensure I did not disturb the peace of our home. The air crackled with unspoken tension as I busied myself around the kitchen. Shelley hummed along to the radio, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. Her joke about giving me more time to sneak out the window had planted a seed of doubt, a suspicion that had slowly blossomed into a full-blown obsession. Our once carefree laughter had been replaced by a hollow echo. Dinner simmered on the stove, a silent witness to the growing distance between us. The silence gnawed at me, urging me to take action. So I took matters into my own hands. The house became my fortress, a meticulously crafted puzzle box. The alarm system, originally a playful deterrent, now served a dual purpose. The blaring shriek that greeted me every evening was a minor annoyance, a necessary evil. Every ear-splitting wail was a confirmation, a test of the system's functionality. Like a sentinel guarding the gates, the alarm stood watch. The windows were a web of invisible tripwires, a silent net that would ensnare any unwelcome visitor. But the real jewel in my security crown was the cleverly disguised bypass wire above the basement door. Nestled above the doorway, it rendered the sensor useless, a silent guardian unknown to even Shelley. The basement itself was a secret haven, rarely graced by Shelley's presence. Even if she did venture down, I doubted she'd notice the expertly concealed wire. Each step in the staircase, once a source of annoyance for my unsuspecting wife, had been meticulously secured just a week prior. The nagging that had driven me to distraction had, in a twisted sense, provided the perfect opportunity for improvement. A triumphant grin spread across my face as I tested the stairs for the 100th time. My 220 pounds landed with a satisfying silence, a testament to the success of my secret project. The worn windbreaker hanging near the top of the stairs held a small, reassuring weight in its pocket, a tool that I fervently hoped I wouldn't need. Violence was never my first choice, but the gnawing suspicion in my gut wouldn't be ignored. Something was off, a dissonance in the melody of our lives. Confronting Shelley wouldn't solve anything. Denial was a practiced art, and even a confession wouldn't erase the doubt festering within me. 3 years of unfulfilled dreams, of whispered prayers and longing glances at empty cribs, had taken their toll. The doctor's insensitive joke, a misplaced attempt at humor, echoed in my memory. Fully clothed or not, he chuckled, oblivious to the pain embedded in his words. Shelley, in turn, had her own secret doctor visits, a long-standing tradition that predated our marriage. A chance encounter outside the hair salon had shattered my trust, casting a long shadow over our relationship. Getting her hair done instead of attending a doctor's appointment? The inconsistency gnawed at me, a puzzle piece that wouldn't fit. But pressing matters, the never-ending hustle of work, had pushed these suspicions to the back burner. Until a month ago, that is. The memory hung heavy in the air, a turning point in the silent war raging within our seemingly perfect home. A shadow settled over our lives, a dark cloud that descended after the doctor's sobering pronouncement. Tears welled in Shelley's eyes, but they were few, swallowed quickly by a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It might be difficult," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Maybe even impossible." I held her close, the unspoken fear a heavy weight in my gut. "We'll keep trying," I mumbled, the words tasting hollow on my tongue. But even as I spoke, a seed of doubt took root. Her reassurance lacked conviction, a discordant note in the harmony of our marriage. Shelley became the subject of my silent scrutiny. The woman I knew, the one who spent most evenings curled up on the couch with me, suddenly seemed like a stranger. There were no late night calls, no unexplained absences. She was always there when I returned from my bi-monthly work trips. Affairs? The thought gnawed at me. But Shelley never strayed far from home. Even the most elaborately constructed lie crumbles under the weight of evidence, and I found none. Pills, maybe. But she radiated health, a robust figure that defied the stereotypical image of a woman on birth control. Gambling? The occasional lottery ticket didn't translate into a hidden gambling addiction. Our finances, meticulously managed by Shelley, showed no signs of extravagance. Except, of course, for her clothes. Shelley had a weakness for fashion, a penchant for indulging in new outfits that surprised even me. And the trips to the salon, $150 for a manicure and haircut? It felt excessive, a splurge in our otherwise practical life. Still, I couldn't deny that the perfectly manicured nails looked good on her, a subtle detail that accentuated her natural beauty. Night after night, while Shelley showered, I would succumb to a nagging curiosity, rummaging through drawers and cabinets. Her closet held a secret world of dresses, some never seen on her. In a drawer, nestled amongst lingerie, that always surprised me with its delicate designs, lay a small pouch containing unfamiliar panties. It wasn't unusual for Shelley to wear alluring clothes for our date nights, a prelude to passionate encounters that fueled my own desires. I relished seeing her transformed, the way she would twirl and pose, knowing she captivated every eye in the room. But then, tucked away in another corner, I found them, birth control pills. The sight sent a jolt of anger through me, but I forced it down, the memory of a past mistake stinging my conscience. Years ago, I had caught my then-girlfriend Dana in a compromising position, her lips locked with another man. Blindsided by betrayal, I'd reacted impulsively, a punch thrown before reason intervened. It turned out to be her brother, a surprise visitor she hadn't mentioned. The humiliation of that night still lingered, a stark reminder of the consequences of acting rashly. Shelley emerged from the shower, a serene smile playing on her lips. I had my doubts, my suspicions simmering beneath the surface. But before I could confront her, I needed answers. This wasn't a time for accusations fueled by anger. This called for a more calculated approach, a strategy to uncover the truth hidden beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life. The Idaho trip was a turning point, a revelation that unfolded beneath a vast, clear sky. My job, a tapestry woven from travel, fence design, and the satisfaction of helping farmers, took me to countless corners of the country. Bidding on projects, crafting corrals for livestock, it was a career that nourished my soul, allowing me to connect with the earth and the people who lived off it. This particular project held a special charm. Nearly 4 miles of fencing sold, a handshake deal sealed with a hearty dinner. Sam Martin, the ranch owner, was the embodiment of rugged kindness. Faded red long johns and suspenders held together a man whose weathered face held a lifetime of stories. Doy, his wife, radiated warmth with a smile that never seemed to fade. The day unfolded like a dream. We toured the sprawling ranch on Honda ATVs, the wind whipping through our hair as we discussed cattle breeds and hunting seasons. Sam, a kindred spirit, unearthed a shared passion for the outdoors, bridging the gap between strangers with a shared love of the chase. He became a father figure in a way I hadn't anticipated, filling a void I hadn't realized existed. It was remarkable, the intimacy that could bloom in a single sun-drenched day of conversation. But there was Molly, his daughter. Even in the casual attire of a flannel shirt and jeans, her beauty was undeniable. There was a spark, a flicker of interest in her eyes. Yet the weight of my wedding band served as a constant reminder of the boundaries that existed. Despite the pull, she was off limits. The drive home the next day was strange. They were good people, the Martins, the kind you craved a deeper connection with. Their ranch, a haven of rolling hills and abundant water, spoke volumes of Sam's dedication. Years of sweat and toil had built a legacy now threatened by the encroaching tide of civilization. Newcomers, with their manicured lawns and sterile gardens, couldn't stomach the sight of cows and sheep freely roaming their precious land. The choice was stark: build fences or succumb to the inevitable sprawl. Fences became his salvation, and Jerry fencing became an unexpected hero. Work, however, had its drawbacks. Long stretches away from home were par for the course. This Idaho trip, over 350 miles away, was no different. The company provided comfortable motels and decent meals, allowing me to return home well rested. But this time, things were different. Sam and Doy's hospitality extended beyond business. They insisted I stay the night, offering a spacious upstairs bedroom. The peacefulness was almost unsettling. The only sounds were the occasional bleats of sheep or a cow's moo, each a jarring alarm clock in the quiet symphony of the night. The heat pressed down, leading me to kick off the covers around 2 a.m. It was then, bathed in the cool moonlight filtering through the window, that a new realization dawned on me. It wasn't just the job, it wasn't just the travel. There was a yearning, a dissatisfaction gnawing at the edges of my seemingly contented life. And that, I knew, deserved further exploration. Sleep evaded me that night. Drawn by nature's call, I stumbled towards the bathroom, passing a slightly ajar doorway. A soft nightlight cast an ethereal glow on the room within. On the bed lay Molly, a vision bathed in moonlight. Unclothed from the waist up, the shadows veiled her lower half, revealing only the hint of a bare breast. A patch of dark hair peeked through, a detail both unexpected and undeniably sensual. Though seemingly asleep, her beauty held me captive for a fleeting moment. Shame washed over me as I tore my gaze away, the act of voyeurism leaving a sour taste in my mouth. Back in my own room, the silence now felt suffocating. The previously closed bedroom door now stood ajar, a silent reminder of my transgression. Morning arrived, painting the sky with vibrant hues. Sam and Doy, the epitome of warm hospitality, ushered me towards the kitchen table. A feast awaited, fluffy scrambled eggs, savory ham, and golden brown potatoes unlike any I'd ever tasted. "Grown right here on the farm," boomed Sam, noticing my appreciation for the second helping. 40 acres dedicated to potatoes, up on the North Range. Doy, a woman whose smile could melt glaciers, chimed in. "We love fresh food." Just then, Molly entered, a vision in casual attire, jeans draped over long, shapely legs, and a flannel shirt that hugged her curves. Her eyes met mine, a playful glint sparking within them. A raised eyebrow sent a blush creeping up my neck. Doy's knowing glance and mischievous grin didn't go unnoticed. "More coffee, Jerry?" Doy offered, her voice laced with a knowing warmth. "Yes, please," I mumbled, feeling the heat rising in my cheeks. Their hospitality was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the routine of my own life. Breakfast finished, I packed my things, the contract and a surprisingly hefty check tucked safely within my briefcase. It was time to head back to my own life, my own routine. Yet a nagging thought lingered, the possibility of a life like theirs, a life filled with warmth, fresh air, and the unpretentious beauty of nature. Doy pressed a loaf of her homemade cornbread into my hands as I climbed into the truck. "Thank you," I mumbled, already picturing the comfort it would offer on the long drive back. Molly stood on the porch, a lone figure framed by the rustic wooden railing. Her hand rested casually on the top rail, and as I started the truck, our eyes met. A small wave from me, a wave back from her. A silent exchange. The miles stretched before me, a monotonous ribbon of asphalt. Yet my thoughts refused to follow suit. Molly's image, the way she lay in bed, kept intruding. Shelley, my wife, kept the house in immaculate order, a stark contrast to the rustic charm of the ranch. Her greeting upon my return, usually a tight hug and a rush of affection, felt rehearsed now. These trips, rarely more than a night, always fueled a renewed passion upon my return. Shelley, despite her 28 years, maintained a figure that could turn heads. Her career in real estate, fueled by commission, sometimes even surpassed my own earnings. The routine was predictable, almost clockwork. It wasn't unusual for Shelley to experience dry spells in her real estate career, months stretching by without a closed deal. Despite the financial uncertainty, we managed to make ends meet. My current truck, the trusty Dodge Ram, was nearing retirement age. A few dents and scratches marred its once proud exterior, but it still ran like a champ. A new truck, however, seemed like a justifiable indulgence. After all, the Ram was paid off in full, and a reliable vehicle was essential for my work. Our physical intimacy was another familiar constant. A couple of times a week, a satisfying rhythm we'd settled into. Shelley always appeared enthusiastic, her touch eager. It was a comfort, a cornerstone of our relationship. Yet, beneath the surface of contentment, a seed of doubt had taken root. A nagging feeling that things weren't quite as perfect as they seemed. This latest trip was no different. Upon returning home, Shelley greeted me with her usual warmth, a a prelude to the physical connection we craved. We wasted no time, retreating to the sanctuary of our bedroom. The crisp sheets held the promise of a familiar pleasure, and for a while, I managed to push aside the worries that gnawed at me. The truth is, I didn't have any concrete proof. Maybe Shelley had genuinely gone to both appointments that day, the doctor and the hair salon. Perhaps the new clothes and lingerie were a thoughtful gesture, a playful surprise meant to rekindle the spark. There were times, after all, when she'd dress up for an ordinary dinner date, twirling around in a new outfit, the glint in her eyes teasingly hinting at what lay beneath. But this time, shaking off the suspicion felt like trying to ignore a persistent mosquito buzzing in your ear. I was determined to uncover the truth. The discovery of birth control pills was a revelation, shattering the illusion I'd clung to. It wasn't just about delaying parenthood, it hinted at a deeper deception. Driven by a newfound urgency, I embarked on a covert investigation, right under Shelley's unsuspecting nose. Back home after my supposed Idaho trip, I pulled up to the house, searching for any sign of an unfamiliar vehicle. Finding none, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps I'd overreacted, letting my imagination run wild. Neighbors' cars sat parked in their usual spots, offering no clues. The upstairs bedroom light, however, cast an unsettling glow through the tightly drawn curtains. It felt like a beacon in the darkness, a silent confirmation of my unease. The only evidence I had to support my suspicions was this gut feeling, this gnawing sense of betrayal. Birth control pills hidden in her drawer were a stark reminder that something was amiss. The memory of seeing her leave the hair salon instead of her doctor's appointment echoed in my mind. It was a detail that, like a single whiff of smoke, had ignited a firestorm of suspicion. If you smell a rat, there probably is one, my mom used to say, a phrase that echoed in my head with unnerving accuracy. That night, the sense of impending discovery hung heavy in the air. Straining to hear any sound above the roar of the shower, I stood frozen at the top of the stairs. Almost 2 a.m. It felt an awfully strange time for her to be showering. I'd envisioned finding her asleep, oblivious to the storm brewing within me, or perhaps engaged in whatever clandestine activity she was up to. This late hour, considering I was supposed to be miles away in Idaho, seemed like prime time for whatever secret life she was leading. The next day stretched on, a slow burn of anticipation finally culminating in a phone call. Idaho beckoned, a promising job offer shimmering on the other end of the line. Sealing the deal was a breeze. Sam and Doy, thrilled with my previous work, placed their trust in me over the phone. They even extended an invitation to stay, their hospitality boundless. But duty called, or rather, the lure of another, smaller project closer to home. For a fleeting moment, I entertained the idea of returning to the ranch, of indulging in more of Doy's legendary cornbread and perhaps, just perhaps, catching another glimpse of Molly. But I quickly wrestled the thought down, shaking my head to clear the fog of temptation. Standing there on the staircase, a tool clutched in my hand, I felt oddly scattered. This focus on work, this obsession with a woman I barely knew, it felt disorienting. The urge to retreat, to simply walk out the door and leave it all behind, was strong. But a stubborn need for certainty held me fast. If Shelley was innocent, then sneaking back in, resolving this suspicion, would clear the air and allow us to move forward. If, however, she wasn't, well, the path ahead was a murky unknown. The possibility of an affair, though fueled by flimsy evidence, had become a persistent itch under my skin. I stood there, feeling foolish for the time it took, straining my ears for any sound. The only clue was the rhythmic whoosh of the shower, a familiar soundtrack to Shelley's pre-bed ritual. It wasn't unusual for her to disappear into its warm embrace for a good half hour. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open slowly, half expecting to find an empty room. But no. There, perched on the edge of the disheveled bed, his back to the door, sat a man. Fully clothed and engrossed in a magazine, Jerry's popular science magazine, to be exact. A wave of anger, hot and heavy, surged through me. The shower continued its steady rhythm, a counterpoint to the rising fury within. As the man turned a page, his expression morphed from serene concentration to a mix of shock and guilt. It was Art Barnes, the man who held the keys to Shelley's real estate success, the one who wielded the power to approve or deny loan applications that fueled her commissions. His silvering hair betrayed his age, somewhere in his 50s, but his imposing stature, even larger than my own, filled the room. I knew the drill. Art Barnes was a fixture at any lucrative deal in town. But I also knew, with a sinking feeling, that a confrontation was likely to end poorly for me. This wasn't a scenario where fists would settle the score. "It's not what it seems," Barnes stammered, his voice laced with fear as he noticed the tool clutched tightly in my hand. "You come into my house to mess around with my wife in my own bed?" I growled, my voice a low rumble fueled by anger. Barnes opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off, raising the tool in a threatening gesture. It connected with the magazine, sending it flying. Instead of backing down, though, Barnes charged. I was caught off guard, expecting fear to make him cower. Perhaps his size emboldened him. He lunged at me before I could fully react, forcing me to maneuver around the bed in a desperate dance. The tool came up again, this time connecting with a sickening thud, Barnes' stomach. His face contorted in pain, his hand instinctively flying to the wound. Time seemed to stretch, the shower's steady song the only backdrop to the unfolding chaos. "What's going on?" Shelley's voice, laced with alarm, cut through the tension as the bathroom door flew open. Barnes, his face pale with a mixture of pain and fear, lunged at me again. But this time, I was ready. The world seemed to slow down. The image of Barnes charging at me seared into my memory. Movies and TV shows made it look so simple. A single shot, a thud, and the villain falls. But reality was a messy, brutal thing. Even after hitting Barnes square in the gut, he lunged forward again, fueled by a primal rage. I reacted instinctively, raising the tool one more time. This time, the sickening thud was accompanied by a loud groan as Barnes crumpled to the floor. Shelley's voice, laced with panic, cut through the tension. "What's that?" she shrieked, the bathroom door swinging open with a bang. She stood there, a vision of confusion, her hair dripping with water and suds clinging to her skin. My eyes darted to her, briefly registering the blonde curls peeking from beneath the lather, a stark contrast to the life I thought I knew. "Who's this guy? What the heck is going on here?" she yelled, her voice trembling. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. Her gaze locked on Barnes, sprawled on the floor like a broken doll. "Honey, it's not what it seems," she pleaded, her voice a desperate whimper. "Good Lord, Shelley. You're covered in soap suds, and this guy's on the floor half naked." I roared, my frustration boiling over. "No, honey, we were just talking, that's all." She whimpered, her voice barely a whisper. "Just talking? At 2 a.m. in the morning, in our bedroom, with you completely naked?" I bellowed, incredulity coloring my tone. I just needed a shower, we weren't." Her voice trailed off, replaced by a tremor of fear that flickered in her eyes. "Lying traitor." I screamed, a primal fury erupting within me. In a moment of blind rage, I did something I never thought I would. I lunged at her, the tool flashing in my hand, and she crumpled to the floor just like they did in the movies. A horrified scream ripped from her throat as she fell. The scene unfolded like a nightmarish dream. I stood there, detached and numb, as if watching it all happen to someone else. My rage simmered down, replaced by a cold, unsettling calm. It was time to assess the damage. Kneeling beside Shelley, I reached out a hand to touch her, a sliver of concern flickering within me. Barnes, meanwhile, was moaning loudly, his eyes wide with terror. "Don't end me, please," he rasped, his voice laced with desperation. "You bastard," I muttered, hatred churning in my gut. An eerie silence descended upon the room. Barnes, sensing the shift in my demeanor, quieted down suddenly. This sudden calm washed over me, isolating me from the scene playing out before me. I felt like an observer, watching a stranger navigate a chaotic situation. Approaching Shelley, I looked down at her. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of betrayal and fear. "Shelley," I began, my voice raspy. "Was it worth it?" She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on a spot on the floor, a silent tear rolling down her cheek. Letting out a sigh of defeat, I muttered, "Forget it." Stepping away from her, I grabbed the phone from the nightstand, the familiar weight grounding me. Dialing 911, I spoke in a calm, measured voice. "I found an intruder in my wife's bedroom." I stopped him, but my wife got hurt. "Can you send an ambulance?" Sliding the tool back into my belt, I descended the stairs. a hollow ache settling in my chest. The sight of the refrigerator, a beacon of normalcy in the chaos, drew me in. Inside, nestled amongst the usual array of groceries, sat a six-pack of beers, a silent testament to Shelley's shopping routine. An unopened bag of chips sat next to it, along with my favorite mixed nuts. Grabbing the chips and the nuts, I retreated to the living room, seeking solace in their familiar crunch. Settling on the couch, I positioned myself with a clear view of the stairs, my mind replaying the events of the night. Numbers of the job I'd just bid on danced in my head as I tried to drown out the sound of Shelley's muffled sobs coming from upstairs. Reaching for the remote, I switched on the TV, the mindless chatter offering a temporary escape. The chips tasted good, a sharp contrast to the bitterness brewing within me. By the time I finished my second beer and half the bag of chips, the wail of sirens pierced the night. Took them long enough, I grumbled the lawyer, a squat man named Jack Ireland with a battered briefcase that looked like it had seen more battles than I had, didn't offer much comfort. He surveyed the charges, his face a mask of disapproval. "The situation isn't exactly ideal," he finally muttered. Being in jail was a new experience for me. I'd never needed a lawyer before, let alone ended up in a situation where I needed a whole firm: Mercer, McLaren, Hanson, Ireland, and Phillips, according to another inmate who boasted about his damn good lawyer, Jack Ireland. "Why are you still here then?" I'd asked, earning a withering look. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Ireland reviewed the charges, then let out a sigh. "Bail hearings first," he declared. "There's enough equity in your house to cover it. Then we wait for the grand jury to decide if there's a case." "How serious is it?" I asked, my voice cracking a little. "Attempted murder," Ireland said bluntly. "Look, if you're going to shoot someone, for God's sake finish it. Otherwise, they'll testify against you. You're in deep trouble. And that little tool you used? You should have used a magnum or something." He snorted, more amused than sympathetic. My mind raced. "How bad are their injuries?" I stammered. Information was scarce. "Your wife will be okay, a flesh wound. Barnes, though. Those little bullets tend to bounce around. He needed a lot of surgery." "Why did you shoot him again?" he inquired, his gaze sharp. "He was coming at me," I blurted. "That sounds deliberate." "You hit him in the groin," Ireland observed dryly. "Good," I replied with a defiance I didn't entirely feel. Another snort escaped the lawyer. "A magnum would have taken them clean off. All you did was poke a hole between them." It took a month for bail to be set. Stepping out into the fresh air felt like a dream. The clean smell of the world was almost overwhelming after the stale institutional air of the jail. I couldn't go home. A restraining order kept me 100 yards away from Shelley, who had long left the hospital by that point. But there was a silver lining. The house ownership was titled jointly. Shelley Jacobson or Gerald Jacobson, either of us could sign the paperwork. It was a legal detail I hadn't noticed before, but one that brought a grim satisfaction. Shelley, in her haste, had overlooked it. Perhaps the pain medication clouded her judgment. Jack Ireland turned out to be a decent lawyer, but his services came with a hefty price tag. If Shelley wanted to keep the house, there would be some serious bills to pay. It seemed the legal battle was far from over. Jack Ireland's legal fees hung over me like a storm cloud. My savings account, once my safety net, was now a gaping hole. I knew this was just the tip of the iceberg, and a tremor of anger ran through me when I considered Shelley's reaction. But anger was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. My truck, thankfully, was still parked around the corner. The restraining order mentioned 100 yards, but measuring distances wasn't exactly my forte. A dozen parking tickets adorned the windshield, a testament to my recent absence. Surprisingly, the truck hadn't been towed. With a defiant chuckle, I tossed the tickets into the nearest trash can. Let them try and arrest me now. My old boss greeted me with a mixture of nervousness and relief. It wasn't a surprise. The news reports hadn't exactly painted me in a favorable light. He mumbled something about needing to hire someone else during my unavailability. The irony wasn't lost on me. Parked in a place called South Park, I couldn't help but find a morbid humor in the situation. The next day, Ireland arranged for a police escort to retrieve my belongings from the house. Maybe he wasn't such a bad lawyer after all. Shelley was conveniently absent. I packed my clothes, tools, my 2 cherished Epiphone guitars, my fishing gear, and the coin collection I'd been building for years. The new big screen TV was tempting, but the lack of electricity in my future woodsman life quickly quelled that desire. As I left, I noticed the can of mixed nuts by my chair. A small smile played on my lips as I grabbed it. The remaining beers, however, held no appeal under the watchful and disapproving gaze of the officer. Before leaving the porch, I couldn't resist a small act of defiance. Right in front of the oblivious cop, I changed the alarm code. It was a petty move, but it felt strangely empowering. The local pawn shop offered a meager $1,500 for my guitars and most of my fishing gear. It wasn't much, but it was all I had left. Next stop, the post office. Of course, my key didn't work. Shelley had obviously changed the lock on their shared PO box. The clerk, clearly flustered by my unexpected arrival, hesitated before handing me my mail. The fear in her eyes was a stark contrast to the usual bureaucratic indifference. Swept in amongst credit card applications and flyers was a letter from a funeral home. An oddly appropriate addition to the mix, I thought grimly. As I walked away, the weight of the future settled heavy on my shoulders. The legal battle had just begun, and my resources were dwindling faster than a sandcastle in the tide. The news reports had done a number on me. Crazed and jealous husband, they called me, a caricature that made me want to crawl into a hole. Apparently, Art Barnes's version of events had taken root, the version where I was the villain, storming into a meeting and firing off rounds like a desperado. Jerry, the responsible contractor? Nowhere to be found in that narrative. Jack Ireland was right. If I intended to shoot someone, I should have committed to the act. Now, I was left to shoulder the blame for a half-baked story. My life in South Park, as I'd started calling it with a touch of morbid humor, was a far cry from my old life. My conspicuous yellow Dodge Ram, an unwelcome beacon, was tucked away in the bushes. My days were spent fishing for trout in the nearby creek. Size limits a distant concern. They couldn't arrest me for that, could they? The meager catch cooked over a fire did little to fill the void in my stomach, but it was sustenance nonetheless. Just as I was cleaning up, the insistent buzzing of my phone startled me. It was my old boss, his voice surprisingly friendly. Friendly? This threw me off. What did he want after everything that had happened? Jerry, I gotta talk to you, he began. Now what? I thought, a wave of irritation washing over me. Remember that job at Sam Martin's farm in Idaho? He continued. Yeah, I mumbled, unsure where this was going. Well, he's got this massive project, over 10,000 acres. Needs fencing, barns, the whole shebang. All the way to the city limits. It's our biggest job yet, he said, his excitement crackling through the phone. My irritation didn't fade. Why was everyone acting like I was radioactive? I spent my days alone, ostracized by the world I once knew. What's that got to do with me? I asked through gritted teeth. Martin insists it's you or no one, he explained. Now this was interesting. But I can't leave the state, I reminded him. What do you think? He pressed. I considered the situation. Maybe, just maybe, there was an angle here. Listen, I began, a plan forming in my mind. No job, no deal. Silence. I pictured my old boss running his hand through his hair in frustration. All right, he conceded. How about you get your old job back? Not good enough, I countered. Double commission? He offered, desperation creeping into his voice. Double it, and my job back full time. I was pushing my luck, but I knew my worth. Hold on, he stammered. You don't have any tools, right? This next part was crucial. No, the cops confiscated them, I said, suppressing the urge to shout about not being a trigger-happy maniac, as the newspaper articles had portrayed me. Another pause. He was clearly weighing the costs. What about back pay? I added, pressing my advantage. Being fired without explanation wasn't exactly fair. More silence. He was doing the math in his head. $5 a foot for fencing, multiplied by 10,000 acres, barns big enough to house elephants. It was a hefty sum, but the potential profit was even larger. Half your back pay, plus benefits reinstated, he finally agreed. I knew I had him. He wouldn't budge on the full back pay, but the rest was a win. All right, deal, I said, a grin spreading across my face. The small victory called for a celebration. I grabbed my wallet and headed down to the corner store. the image of a can of mixed nuts a welcome beacon in the gloom that had settled over my life. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a way forward. The judge's steely gaze switched between me and Jack, my lawyer, who wore a poker face that would make a champion gambler jealous. Despite the judge's suspicion, he granted my request to cross state lines for work. There was a catch, of course. "Mr. Jacobson," he boomed, his voice echoing in the cavernous courtroom, "these are serious charges you're facing." "Very serious. However, a man has the right to work until his case is settled. Don't mess this up, or you'll be singing a different tune back in this cell. Understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, managing a straight face despite the knot of anxiety twisting in my gut. The next day, I found myself on the road to Idaho, a state refreshingly devoid of the news articles that had painted me as a villain. Old Man Martin, the owner of the ranch, greeted me with a booming laugh and a firm handshake. Apparently, the news hadn't traveled this far north. I decided not to stir the pot. "We're planting corn over by that little creek," he explained, pointing towards a sun-drenched patch of land. "Good south-facing soil. Need a fence to keep the sheep out. As for the Angus cattle, used to let them roam free, but a development's popping up nearby. Tired of the complaints, so we want to keep them nice and contained on our own land." It became clear that Old Man Martin wasn't hurting for cash. The ranch sprawled across acres of rolling hills, a far cry from my cramped city life. By the time we returned to the farmhouse, the long shadows stretched across the land, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The aroma of a freshly cooked meal wafted from the kitchen, and my stomach grumbled its disapproval of the single beer I'd allowed myself at the gas station earlier. As much as I craved a piece of that warm hospitality, particularly a glimpse of Molly, Old Man Martin's granddaughter, I knew I had to get back to Oregon before midnight. The judge's words echoed in my mind. Back in Oregon, the automated message at the bail office greeted me with a monotonous voice. I gritted my teeth at the impersonal reminder of my situation. The next morning I called again, this time reaching a human being. "Listen, you don't need to call in every single day," she said with a hint of annoyance. "Just follow the rules, all right?" "Right," I mumbled, hanging up. It seemed responsibility went both ways. They only monitored me if I drew attention to myself. Perfect. Climbing back into my truck, I promised myself to stay on the straight and narrow. Every mile marker ticked by slower than the last. Relief washed over me the moment I pulled onto the Martin Ranch driveway. There, perched on the porch like a lookout, was Molly. Her face lit up when she saw me, and she disappeared into the house for a moment. When she emerged, she wore a floppy hat that shielded her face from the sun, a basket dangling from her arm. Her attire screamed practicality, cut-off jeans and a t-shirt, the lack of a bra evident in the way her top bounced with every step. "Let's go," she exclaimed, hopping into the passenger seat like a dog eager for a walk. "Where to?" I asked, starting the engine. "Dad wants me to take you to the area near the development so you can measure for the fence," she explained. "Everyone's busy shearing sheep today." "Shearing, huh?" I inquired, catching a glimpse of her profile. "Yeah, the sheep. They'll be kept occupied until dark," she replied, a mischievous glint in her eyes. The journey took over an hour. Cattle dotted the landscape, barely acknowledging our presence. We chatted about everything and nothing, my eyes occasionally drawn to the way her figure swayed with the rhythm of the bumpy terrain. Open fields stretched endlessly before us, marked only by the occasional tire tracks from an ADE. The world seemed vast and full of possibilities, a stark contrast to the cramped confines of my recent life. Luckily, Sam's trusty border collies sprang into action. These brilliant dogs, with a minimum of fuss and a lot of silent command, managed to round up the errant sheep and shepherd them back into the pen. As I watched them work their magic, I marveled at their intelligence and Molly's ability to communicate with them silently. Sheep, simple creatures? Not a chance. And as for the gait, well, it seemed even the most cunning sheep were no match for Molly's quick thinking and a strategically placed chain latch. Weeks turned into a familiar rhythm. The weekends were carved out for the long drive to the ranch, a pilgrimage to a world far removed from my cramped city apartment. Here, under the vast blue canvas of the sky, I shed the skin of my old life and embraced a new one. Sam and Doy, ever observant, kept a watchful eye on me. Their gaze, though scrutinizing, held a hint of warmth that I found oddly comforting. The days were filled with chores, a welcome change from the sterile monotony of my office job. I learned to mend fences, to coax stubborn cattle into pens, and to navigate the unpredictable world of sheep, creatures with a surprising knack for mischief. Each new task was a challenge, a puzzle to be solved with sweat and a little bit of ingenuity. It was a life that demanded physical strength, but also a certain mental agility. For a while at least, the world beyond the ranch gates faded away. The legal battles, the crumbling marriage, the weight of uncertainty, all of it seemed to recede into the background. Here, in the heart of this sprawling ranch, I was simply Jerry, a man learning a new way of life. The illusion, however, was shattered the moment I stepped back into my tiny apartment. The cramped space, once familiar, now felt suffocating. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the symphony of sounds that filled my days at the ranch, the bleating of sheep, the barking of dogs, the rhythmic clang of tools against metal. The city, once my haven, now felt like a prison. It was on one such evening, as I fumbled with the keys to my apartment, that the phone rang. The shrill sound pierced the silence, jolting me back to the reality I'd been trying to escape. A jolt of surprise ran through me as I recognized Shelley's voice. We hadn't spoken since I'd left, a silent understanding hanging heavy between us. "Jerry?" She spoke, her voice hesitating slightly. "Shelley," I acknowledged, my voice betraying none of the emotions swirling within me. I braced myself, expecting a conversation about the upcoming divorce, a formality neither of us particularly relished. There was a pause, then a sigh. "How are you?" she finally asked. Her question, seemingly simple, hung heavy in the air. It was a question loaded with unspoken meanings, regret, a desperate hope for reconciliation, a morbid curiosity about my new life. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice flat. The truth was, I wasn't sure how I was. Lost, confused, maybe even a little hopeful. A confusing cocktail of emotions that I wasn't ready to unpack over the phone. There was another pause, longer this time, filled with the crackle of static. Finally, she spoke again. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, her voice surprisingly devoid of malice, "for not making a scene about the alimony." The court-mandated alimony payment was a bitter pill to swallow. A hefty sum, it felt like a constant reminder of the life I'd built and then watched crumble. "It's what the court ordered," I said, my reply laced with a hint of bitterness. "My lawyer said it could have been more if you hadn't found other means of income." She trailed off, her voice laced with something that could have been suspicion. I held my tongue. There was no point in arguing about my finances, especially with someone who no longer had a stake in them. "I also wanted to let you know that I forgive you," she continued, her voice taking on a strange sincerity. "Forgiveness?" The word hung in the air, heavy with irony. "Forgive me?" I echoed, incredulous. "For what exactly?" "I know you were upset," she said, her voice gaining a pleading edge. "You didn't mean to hurt me." I let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, come on, Shelley," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't pretend you were innocent." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, she spoke again, her voice tight with barely concealed anger. "It's not a joke, Jerry. I'm serious. I still love you. I always have. Maybe if you're up for it, we could go out. Have a nice dinner, talk things through?" Recognition dawned on me. That tone, saccharine and laced with a desperate hope, I knew it all too well. It was the same tone she used when she wanted to smooth over a fight, to rewrite the narrative of her actions. "That's not a good idea, Shelley," I finally said, my voice firm. Frustration clawed at me as the phone clattered down on the receiver. Shelley's taunting voice echoed in my head, her twisted version of events a slap in the face. The anger was a hot, searing ember in my gut, and for a moment I let it consume me. "I might just come over there and finish the job," I'd roared, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. In the background, I thought I heard a faint giggle, a cruel punctuation mark on her twisted narrative. The sound sent a shiver down my spine, a stark reminder of the manipulative woman I'd once called wife. The phone call had been a trap, a carefully orchestrated attempt to paint me as the villain. Reality, cold and unwelcome, settled in. Now, I was back in a jail cell, the metal bars a stark contrast to the open skies of the ranch. It felt absurd, a prison sentence for a moment of anger, a reaction fueled by the betrayal that still burned fresh. My lawyer, a weary veteran with eyes that held a lifetime of witnessing human folly, entered the cell. "3 big guys, huh?" he said, his voice dry with experience. "And handcuffs again. Can't say I'm surprised." "I didn't really threaten her," I stammered, the anger giving way to a sinking feeling. She made me mad. Called me up, saying she forgave me. Can you believe it? That woman cheated on me, and now she's acting like some kind of saint? He listened patiently, nodding as I vented. "Look, Jerry," he said when I finished, "they have you on tape. You threatened her in Barnes's office. That breaks the restraining order." "But she called me," I protested, feeling a rising tide of helplessness. "Doesn't that matter?" He sighed. "Not the way they see it. You mean that Barnes guy was there too?" That's when the picture clicked into place. Shelley, the sweet words, the carefully calculated trap, it was all a setup. The lawyer played me a short recording, a snippet of the entire call. All it captured was me yelling, my voice laced with fury, following Shelley's saccharine invitation to dinner. "Tampered with," I muttered, a feeling of dread creeping in. Probably my lawyer agreed, but it still looks bad. The judge, a stern old man with a face etched with experience, glared at me through his spectacles. He shook his head, a silent judgment. In court, they only played the part of the tape where Shelley sounded pleasant, desperate for reconciliation. My own voice, hoarse with rage, filled the courtroom. It was the voice of a man unhinged, a dangerous threat. This man is too dangerous to be free. The prosecutor boomed, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. My lawyer countered, arguing that Shelley's call was a deliberate provocation, a cruel attempt to push me over the edge. He's the victim here. His wife cheated on him, a documented fact, and now they're trying to turn the tables. But the judge remained unconvinced. "Threats were made," he stated simply. "Proof of the affair is irrelevant." And so, back to the jail cell I went. Days bled into weeks, weeks into a month. My lawyer visited, offering updates and unwavering support. Then, one day, a new face appeared, a young woman with a bright smile and a confident gaze. "Carrie Anderson," she introduced herself, extending a hand. "Attorney Anderson, and I'll be taking over your case." "Another lawyer?" I asked, confused. "I can't afford this." "Don't worry about that," she said, her smile widening. "You have some friends who are looking out for you." "Friends? Who could that be?" "Sam Martin and his wife," she revealed, seeing my bewilderment. "They left a message. What did your dad say?" I inquired, my voice thick with sleep and the afterglow of our encounter. "Just laughed," she replied, rolling over to snuggle closer. "Told him we weren't coming back, and he didn't seem bothered. Seems like ranchers have a different pace of life." By nightfall, an undeniable truth had settled over me. I was smitten. Here I was, a guy with a life in shambles, yet Molly saw past the mess. We were practically strangers, but a powerful connection hummed between us. Dinner, devoured in a cozy local diner, felt like a scene ripped from a romance movie. Mustering all my courage, I confessed my feelings. "So," I began, my voice shaky with emotion, "is this just a fling, or are we us for good?" "Yes," she answered before I could complete the question. "I want you to be mine, Jerry. No games." A surprised laugh escaped my lips. "Wow, that's direct." "Your dad said he saw me as breeding stock." Molly snorted. "That's just his way of looking at life. He thinks practically. But you're more than that, Jerry. You're intriguing. A walking mystery." A wave of guilt washed over me. Here she was, all in, while I had a wife I hadn't spoken to in weeks, a legal battle hanging over my head, and absolutely no idea where this was all going. "But where would we live?" she asked, her voice laced with concern, mirroring my own thoughts. I don't know," I stammered, feeling lost. "Well," she said, a smile slowly spreading across her face, "you have a job in a truck. That's a start, right?" "Right," I echoed, a flicker of hope igniting within me. "Let's just take things one day at a time," she continued, her hand reaching for mine. "If I decide to commit to you, it'll be forever. But it has to be all or nothing with me." The weight of her words settled on me. "Molly," I began, a thousand emotions swirling within me, "I'm falling for you, hard. But falling can hurt. A playful look flickered in her eyes. Don't fall just yet, Jerry. Enjoy the climb. I know I am. The truth in her voice resonated deep within me. Disappointment flickered across my face, but she squeezed my hand reassuringly. Easy now, she soothed. For now, you're the only man for me. But if this doesn't feel right, if my heart changes its mind, then that's the end of it. Okay? Okay, I conceded, relief washing over me. Great, then we're on the same page, she declared, her usual optimism returning. Now, how about we get back to the motel? That diner food can only hold us for so long. The next day flew by in a flurry of activity. I finalized the bids and contracts with Sam and his wife, a kindly woman named Doi. After a few minor tweaks, Sam signed the papers, a satisfied grin on his face. Just then, Molly appeared, 2 suitcases trailing behind her. Sam and Doi's expressions mirrored my own surprise. They shifted their gaze to me, their eyes filled with unspoken questions. I'm leaving with Jerry, Molly announced, her voice firm. For the first time, I noticed a flicker of something in Doi's eyes, a hint of disappointment that she quickly masked. Sam, ever the stoic rancher, stood up and walked towards her, enveloping her in a warm hug. As he pulled back, his voice held a newfound seriousness. You've got a lot to figure out, son, he said, his gaze boring into mine. It was clear he saw more than I'd let on. I nodded, my heart pounding. Molly's not going anywhere, I declared, a touch of defiance in my voice. Molly interjected, placing a hand on my arm. Quiet, honey. I like Jerry well enough, and I think he's a decent man. The days flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Work kept me busy from dawn to dusk, but the prospect of seeing Molly at the end of it all fueled my every step. Weekends were dedicated to the long drive to the ranch. Sam and Doi always greeted me with open arms, their smiles genuine and their hospitality boundless. They never batted an eyelash when Molly and I disappeared into her room after dinner, a silent acknowledgement of the blossoming relationship between us. Weeks turned into months, and I began to feel like an extension of the family. The ranch life, once foreign, started to feel strangely familiar. The hearty laughter that filled the evenings, the earthy scent of freshly turned soil, the rhythmic clanging of metal as Sam tinkered in his workshop, it all began to weave itself into the fabric of my existence. And then there was the food. Doi's cooking was legendary. Every meal was a feast, a symphony of flavors that left me wanting more. Breakfast platters piled high with fluffy pancakes and crispy bacon, steaming bowls of chili for lunch, and dinner tables groaning under the weight of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and fresh vegetables. It was a never-ending culinary adventure. But Doi's culinary skills weren't the only surprise. Molly, it turned out, was a natural in the kitchen as well. Meals prepared by her hand were equally delicious, each dish a testament to her love for simple yet satisfying food. Beyond the meals, Molly possessed a surprising strength and resourcefulness that I found incredibly attractive. One afternoon, a large calf, injured and frightened, went rogue. It bucked and kicked, resisting capture. I lunged for its tail, a futile attempt that ended with me being dragged across the dusty field, much to Molly's amusement. Luckily, my blunder managed to slow the calf down enough for her to spring into action. Her movements were swift and sure. She grabbed the calf's front foot, leaning into it with surprising strength and bringing the animal to the ground. With practiced ease, she secured its legs with a rope she'd kept at the ready. The calf quieted down, but not before its mother, a hulking beast, charged at us with a vengeance. Panic surged through me, and I instinctively took a step back. Molly, however, stood her ground. Seeing my hesitation, she grabbed a flimsy stick and thrust it into my hand. Confusion clouded my mind. What exactly was I supposed to do with this twig against a raging beast? As if sensing my fear, Molly took control. She used the stick to tap the cow's face, momentarily distracting it. The confused animal backed away, unsure how to react. Seizing the opportunity, we herded the cow away from the calf and secured the gate. Once the danger had passed, Molly skillfully treated the injured calf, stitching a wound and applying a soothing ointment. As we released the animal back to its mother, I watched with admiration. The bond between them was undeniable, the calf nuzzling its savior before contentedly latching on for a much-needed feed. That was close, I said, wiping a bead of sweat from my brow. I thought that cow was going to attack me. Molly chuckled. Protecting her baby, that's all. Cows are pretty simple creatures, really. Not very bright. It's the sheep you need to watch out for. And watch out I did. I soon learned about the sheep's mischievous ways. Their leader, a particularly cunning ram, would meticulously scrutinize the fence for weaknesses, eventually widening a small gap until it was large enough for him to squeeze through. Of course, the rest of the flock, sheepish as ever, would blindly follow their leader's path to freedom. One particularly chaotic day involved herding a flock of sheep into a corral. The plan was simple: guide them through a chute leading to the barn for shearing. However, chaos erupted when a particularly curious sheep inspected the latch on the gate, nudged it open with its nose, and head-butted the gate wide open. In the blink of an eye, the entire flock was back in the field. The scene was one of pure pandemonium. A pang of loneliness shot through me as I realized how long it had been since I'd felt the touch of another person. But this wasn't the time. This job was my lifeline, and I couldn't afford to jeopardize it or bring any unwanted attention to myself, especially from her family. I stopped the truck at a crest in the trail. Below, a meandering river snaked through the landscape, its surface reflecting the afternoon sun. Half a mile beyond, a row of 3-story apartment buildings rose incongruously from the rolling hills, their sharp edges seemingly at odds with the surrounding wilderness. It felt like a scene ripped from a surreal painting. On the other side of the river, a ribbon of highway hummed with activity, a stark contrast to the quietude of the ranch. Progress, huh? I muttered to myself, a wry smile playing on my lips. The source of the problem was clear, even from this distance. Cattle grazing near those buildings were a recipe for disaster, especially with the proximity of the river. Regulations were regulations, even out here in the wide open spaces. The fence needs to be at least 50 feet from those buildings, and it has to run all the way down to the city limits. I explained to myself, already formulating a plan. We were fortunate in that the ranch owned both banks of the river, which would simplify things considerably. Shifting into 4-wheel drive, I navigated the truck across the shallow stream, using the odometer to meticulously measure the distance as I followed the existing fence line. Back at the main house, I hunched over a table, scribbling calculations on a dusty notepad. It was clear, this job would require the entire crew for several weeks. Looking up, I found Molly perched on a chair, swinging her foot playfully. "Everyone's down at the lower barn. Won't be back for hours," she announced with a grin. Her forwardness caught me off guard. I stammered, a blush creeping up my neck. "There's work to be done, and besides, I'm still married, even though we're separated. And on top of that, we barely know each other." "Oh, right. My bad," she said, feigning innocence. "But you're not wearing a ring, are you? Planning on a divorce?" "Yeah, most likely," I admitted, feeling my resolve strengthen. "Gotcha," she said, a knowing glint in her eye. "So, what happened with your marriage?" Hesitation flickered across me before I sighed. "Well, taking a deep breath, I blurted out, I fired a gun at her." Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "What? At her and the guy she was with? In your house?" "Yeah," I mumbled, feeling the weight of the past press down on me. "Wow," she breathed. "Well, I can't say I blame you." "Did anything?" She trailed off, her voice dropping to a whisper. "No," I replied quickly, understanding what she was asking. "Okay, that's good," she said with a relieved smile. "Any other problems?" I hesitated, then decided there was no point in holding back. I poured out the whole story, the frustration, the anger, the feeling of being betrayed. And Molly just listened, her face a mask of empathy. "So you have to go back to Oregon every night. Is that a permanent thing?" she inquired once I finished. "Until the court case is over," I explained. "Then it's either jail time or who knows." "Can I come with you?" She blurted out before I could even process her question. "To Oregon?" "With me?" I repeated, stunned. "Yeah," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not scared of you. You seem like a decent guy. Maybe you're the one I've been waiting for. I'm not sure yet. But I'm tired of being stuck out here in the middle of nowhere. Don't get me wrong, I love this place, but the only men around are either ancient or married. And frankly, I'm lonely." I stared at her, my mind racing. "Your parents? What about them?" I finally managed. "My dad actually encouraged me to go with you," she said with a surprised laugh. Said you seemed like a good catch. He never says things like that. The only other guy I dated, he said he wasn't worth my time. The unexpected turn of events left me speechless. Here I was, a man facing legal troubles, and this beautiful, spirited woman was offering to throw her life in with mine. It was crazy, impulsive, but a tiny spark of hope. Molly's proposal hung in the air, heavy with the weight of its suddenness. I guess your dad wouldn't have suggested it if he knew you had a boyfriend, I ventured, the image of a disapproving rancher flashing in my mind. Traditional, she affirmed, a playful smile tugging at the corner of her lips. But this whole thing is a bit out of the ordinary, wouldn't you say? A bit, I conceded, the understatement echoing in my head. This wasn't supposed to be part of the deal. I'd come to escape the chaos, not dive headfirst into something completely unknown. Look, Jerry, she began, her gaze steady. I haven't had a ton of experience. There was one guy, childhood sweetheart type of thing. We explored what was expected, but she shrugged, her voice trailing off. Open-minded? I offered, filling the gap. Her eyes lit up. Exactly. And if we're going to be together, permanently I mean, I expect honesty and commitment. No sneaking around, you get me? A wry smile tugged at my lips. I wouldn't dream of it, Molly. Though, with all the drama in my life, who would have thought? She reached out, her hand finding mine. Let's not worry about the ifs and buts right now. We'll cross that bridge if we come to it. And with that, she led me towards the lower barn, where the rhythmic clanging of metal echoed through the air. A dozen men, weathered faces etched with the sun and toil of the land, were busy tending to the sheep. The sight of Molly instantly brought a smile to Mr. Martin's face. He gave us a knowing nod. Jerry and I are heading out for the night, Molly announced, her voice laced with a hint of mischief. Be back tomorrow morning. All right, the old rancher boomed, waving a dismissive hand. Enjoy yourselves, kids. The blatant acceptance caught me off guard. Farmers, Molly chuckled, wrapping an arm around my waist as we walked away. They understand the rhythm of life. Closeness, intimacy, it's all part of the cycle. This woman, she was something else entirely. Here I was, a walking legal case, and she saw past it all. Her honesty, the way she wore her desires on her sleeve, it was both refreshing and intimidating. The drive back to the motel became a blur. I made a valiant effort to keep my eyes on the road, but with Molly beside me, topless and radiating a carefree sensuality, my resolve was constantly tested. Just as we hit the highway, the t-shirt came off. The sight of her sun-kissed skin sent a jolt through me. My first instinct was to pull over, but Molly had other plans. Hey, slow down, Romeo, she said, her voice a husky whisper. We can wait until we get to a proper bed. You'll be ready by then, won't you? Her smile was a challenge, and a promise. My hand involuntarily found its way to the zipper of my jeans. The heat that radiated from her body was a tangible force. Finally, common sense prevailed. Maybe you should put your shirt back on, I suggested, my voice hoarse. That trucker behind us, he might get the wrong idea. A large truck rumbled past, the driver straining to see through his window. They'd just overtaken us at a good 70 miles per hour. Oh, come on, Molly scoffed, completely unfazed. He can see me just fine. Maybe give him a show. She sat up straighter, rolling her shoulders back in a mock model pose. Then, with a playful grin, she stuck her tongue out at the bewildered driver. Jesus, Molly, I muttered, exasperation laced with a strange sense of arousal. For miles, we played this cat and mouse game. She'd tease, I'd plead, and the trucker remained an unwilling audience. Finally, after several near misses, I put my foot down. Molly, please, I said, my voice firm. Put your clothes back on before you get us both killed. She reluctantly complied, a mischievous glint still lingering in her eyes. 5 miles later, the t-shirt was back off. Thankfully, it reappeared before we entered the motel room. The act of love that followed was unlike anything I'd known with Shelley. My wife had always been willing, but there was a passivity to her that never fully engaged me. Molly, on the other hand, was a wildfire, a torrent of raw passion that left me breathless. The night was a whirlwind. Molly wasn't simply eager, she was a force of nature. Before I could even shed all my clothes, we were tangled together, exploring each other with a raw intensity that left me breathless. Most of the night was spent on a voyage of physical discovery, a frantic charting of new territories on our bodies. The next morning, around 11, I found Molly sprawled across our makeshift bed, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. Sunlight streamed through the dusty motel window, painting the room in warm hues. "They think you'll understand. Good breeding stock, right?" A grin, slow and genuine, stretched across my face. Sam and Doy, their kindness a beacon in this storm. Things started moving fast after that. Art Barnes's influence in the town held sway, but it extended only so far. Soon, evidence surfaced, proof of the tampered recording, a trail leading right back to Barnes's office phone. 3 days later, I walked out of jail a free man. The first thing I did was grab my truck and head for Idaho. Molly, her face alight with relief and joy, nearly knocked me over with a hug. Sam and Doy watched from the porch, their faces etched with satisfaction. Justice, slow and deliberate, had finally prevailed. Gratitude welled up in my chest, a warm counterpoint to the lingering unease. "Thank you," I stammered, my voice thick with emotion. "Both of you. I don't even know what to say." Sam chuckled, his weathered face crinkling at the corners. "Don't say anything, son. We just did what needed to be done. For Molly, mostly." That evening, with a heavy heart, I finally laid it all bare. The betrayal, the anger, the phone call that landed me in jail, it all spilled out in a torrent of words. Strangely, though, I'd held back the full story from Molly, perhaps wanting to shield her from the ugliness of it all. To my surprise, they already knew most of it. Details gleaned from conversations, worried glances exchanged in my absence, the pieces had somehow fallen into place. A wave of relief washed over me, a sense of finally being understood. That night, nestled close to Molly in bed, a strange sense of peace settled over me. It was a new kind of peace, tinged with the lingering shadows of the ordeal, but hopeful nonetheless. In Molly's embrace, I found a safe harbor, a place where the storm couldn't touch me. Weeks blurred into a month, culminating in the arrival of the trial day. A new judge presided, another stern-faced man with an air of quiet authority. The courtroom hummed with nervous energy, the air thick with anticipation. The trial unfolded much as I'd expected. Barnes and Shelley stuck to their fabricated story, painting a picture of a harmless business meeting, interrupted by my violent outburst. They claimed Shelley had simply excused herself to use the restroom when I'd barged in, a picture of unhinged rage, and started shooting. But their narrative unraveled under scrutiny. My lawyers expertly exposed the inconsistencies. A business meeting at 2 a.m.? In her bedroom? The prosecution presented a large chart depicting their version of events, with Barnes calmly reading on the bed when I supposedly stormed in. Our team countered with a simple question: how could I have barged in and started shooting if Barnes was seated? Logic dictated that he must have stood up and approached me, an aggressive maneuver considering I was in my own bedroom, confronted by a much larger man. Self-defense. It was a powerful word, one that resonated with the jury. I wasn't the aggressor, they argued. I was simply protecting myself in my own home, from a man who had no business being there. There was no way I could have known Barnes was invited. Not a burglar or worse. The jury exchanged troubled glances. Doubt danced in their eyes. Shelley was called back to the stand, her voice cracking as she maintained the lie of innocence. Then came a bombshell: photos. These were not just any photos. Taken by a skilled private investigator, they depicted Shelley and Barnes in compromising positions. Photos taken well after their supposed business meeting. I recognized them, of course, part of the evidence gathered by my team. But a detail struck me. Barnes looked different. He wasn't the mountain of a man Shelley had portrayed. The reveal sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Shelley's composure crumbled, replaced by a mixture of anger and desperation. As the pictures were displayed on the large screen, a gasp echoed through the room. A commotion erupted. Barnes's wife, face contorted with rage, stood up and launched into a furious tirade before storming out. Barnes himself, exposed and humiliated, sank into his chair, a picture of utter misery. My gaze met Carrie Anderson's, my lawyer, her face an unreadable mask. The prosecution's objections were brushed aside. The damage was done. The truth, laid bare for all to see, hung heavy in the air. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave as the verdict echoed through the silent courtroom. Not guilty on attempted murder. My heart pounded in my chest, a drumbeat against the backdrop of stunned silence. The jury had seen through the lies, the carefully constructed narrative that painted me as a violent aggressor. The joy of this victory, however, was tempered by the second charge, assault with a dangerous weapon. Carrie, my lawyer, had warned me about this possibility. My rage, justified though it might have been, had undeniably led me to take actions that could be construed as excessive. During the break, Carrie and I huddled in a corner of the lobby. "There's one issue," she said, her voice grim. "The injuries you inflicted on Shelley. What are they saying?" I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "That your actions were excessive," she explained. "They could argue self-defense for Barnes, but what you did to Shelley, it might be a tough sell." Options were laid out on the table, each with its own risks and rewards. An insanity defense? Rejected. The judge wouldn't tolerate it. Telling the truth, simply stating that Shelley's actions had pushed me to the edge, could backfire, landing me with a conviction. Ultimately, we decided to walk the tightrope of honesty, hoping the jury would understand the emotional turmoil I'd been through. The final arguments were tense, the air thick with anticipation. Carrie, her voice laced with conviction, argued that my actions were a result of a momentary lapse of judgment, a reaction to a situation fueled by betrayal and rage. When the judge asked for the verdict, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the jury foreman announced the words that would change my life: "Not guilty on attempted murder." A wave of relief rippled through the crowd, a collective sigh escaping lips that had been held tight for so long. However, the celebration was short-lived. Guilty on assault with a dangerous weapon. The judge, a man with weary eyes and a voice that rasped with years of experience, began his sentencing. He spoke of anger, of the consequences of impulsive actions, his voice tinged with a hint of disappointment. But then, he added something unexpected. "At least you didn't end anyone's life," he said, a flicker of something resembling a smile crossing his face. A ripple of nervous laughter echoed through the room. He then laid down the sentence: 5 years, suspended probation, time served. Freedom. It felt surreal, a word that had become a constant companion throughout this ordeal. Relief, gratitude, and a flicker of disbelief warred within me. Embracing Carrie, I finally allowed myself to breathe. As I turned to Molly, the emotions in her eyes mirrored my own. Relief mixed with joy, a silent promise for a future we could finally build together. Walking out of the courthouse hand in hand with Molly, the sunlight felt warmer, the world brighter. The finalization of the divorce, a mere formality at this point, was completed with little fanfare. Shelley, exposed and humiliated, was a ghost in the past we were leaving behind. Justice, though slow and imperfect, had finally prevailed. The truth, like a beacon, had cut through the fog of lies, and I was finally free, ready to embrace the future with the woman who had stood by me through it all. Freedom stretched before me like a sun-drenched highway, a stark contrast to the sterile walls of the jail cell I'd called home for what felt like an eternity. The final divorce meeting, a formality at best, had concluded with a surprising twist. Shelley's lawyer, a sharp woman with a steely gaze, had been present, but Shelley herself was a no-show. As it turned out, alimony wouldn't be on the table. The tables, in fact, had turned. Shelley, it seemed, was now a high earner, her career flourishing in ways it never had during our marriage. A cruel irony, considering the lengths she'd gone to in court to paint me as the villain, the financially irresponsible one. But karma, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. Sliding behind the wheel of my trusty Dodge Diesel, the familiar rumble of the engine a comforting lullaby, I pulled away from the sterile cityscape. Molly, a radiant vision in a sun-kissed blouse, leaned back in the passenger seat, a contented smile gracing her lips. The highway stretched before us, a ribbon of asphalt leading towards a future finally free from the shackles of the past. Coming up on a truck, I warned, more out of habit than necessity. The road ahead was practically deserted, a stark contrast to the urban chaos we'd just left behind. "Don't worry about him," Molly chuckled, her voice laced with a playful defiance. "Let him look. Doesn't bother you, does it?" The question hung in the air, a playful challenge. The warmth of the sun on my skin mirrored the warmth spreading through my chest. "Not a bit," I replied, letting out a low chuckle as I signaled and effortlessly overtook the slow-moving truck on a steep incline. The driver likely wouldn't even register our passing, a blip in his rearview mirror. The silence that followed was comfortable, the kind that only comes with shared experiences and unspoken understanding. We were two souls battered by a storm, finally emerging into the calm after. "What do you think about us getting married, honey?" Molly's voice, soft and hesitant, broke the comfortable silence. My heart skipped a beat. Marriage! It was a thought I'd harbored for a while, a future I craved with Molly by my side, but the legal battles and the uncertainty of everything had made it a distant dream. "I'm all for it," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. A smile bloomed on her face, as radiant as the sun that bathed us in its golden light. "Do you want to?" "Yes," I said, each word carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. "Yes, I really do." A playful glint entered her eyes. "Plus, you kind of have to." Confused, I raised an eyebrow. "Have to? Why?" "We didn't use protection," she said, her voice laced with amusement. "We never have," I countered, a blush creeping up my neck. "What does that have to do with?" My voice trailed off as realization dawned. "Oh," I teased, stretching the word out for emphasis. "Remember that night at the house, when you said you were ready?" "Oh, that's what you meant?" Molly's cheeks mirrored the crimson hue of my own. "I thought you meant ready for us to be together." I admitted, a grin tugging at the corners of my lips. "So, what?" "I was so..." She trailed off, her voice dropping to a whisper. "So what?" I pressed, gently cupping her face with my hand. "My dad owns a tool," she blurted out with a laugh, the tension breaking into a burst of nervous laughter. "He won't need it," I replied, pulling her close and sealing the promise with a kiss. The journey continued, the afternoon sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink as we neared the familiar silhouette of the ranch house perched on the hilltop. A bull, oblivious to the drama unfolding below, was engaged in a passionate encounter with a cow. A fitting metaphor, we mused, for the new chapter about to begin. "I want to go down by the creek," Molly announced as we pulled to a stop. "Why?" I asked, curiosity lacing my voice. "So I can welcome you home the right way," she replied with a mischievous glint in her eyes. Sam and Doy, their weathered faces etched with genuine joy, emerged from the house as we stepped out of the truck. Molly waved at them, a silent thank you for their unwavering support, then grabbed my hand, leading me down the familiar path towards the babbling creek. In the warm embrace of nature's tranquil embrace, I stood there, unencumbered by the confines of clothing, our intertwined hands a silent testament to the connection we shared. As our eyes met, the world seemed to pause, suspended in the timeless moment, the gentle melody of birdsong providing the backdrop to our intimate union. Slowly, almost reverently, we came together, our bodies merging as the creek's gentle current flowed nearby. In the aftermath, we lay entwined, basking in the serenity of our surroundings, the distant bellows of a bull punctuating the air. Playfully, I threw back my head and imitated the deep rumble, eliciting a fit of laughter from my beloved. "You need to work on that," she giggled, her eyes sparkling with mirth. "What about the other part?" I smiled, my heart swelling with the knowledge that I had found my true home in her embrace. Chuckling, we dressed and made our way back to the house. The weight of the world lifted from my shoulders as I realized that in her, I had found the deep, soulful connection I had been searching for all along.